Today, we're talking about a really awesome Christmas movie. JP was calling it an offbeat Christmas movie. It's not exactly one that you would think. It's not the first thing you think of when you think of Christmas movies. We're talking about the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Welcome back, everybody. This is the Pinedo Brothers and the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm your host, Peter, and I have with me my brother.
Hey, I'm JP.
JP, and Merry Christmas, everybody. We are just a couple of days away from Christmas, and this is our very special, very special Christmas episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. So thanks for joining us, and we're happy to have you here. We're talking about the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is, of course, a movie based off the wonderful book by C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia, by the same name.
We should clarify this. We're talking about the Disney movie, not the BBC.
Yes. We're talking about the Disney version of C.S. Lewis, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and not the BBC, which was not very good, in my opinion. There might be some viewers out there that might disagree with me.
I actually enjoyed it.
I would really. Okay.
And wow. I think the follow-up movies for the BBC were far better than the Disney follow-up movies. In that they were watchable.
Yeah. It's not a very high standard for the sequel movie, because I'm a big fan of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but the two ones that Disney did after that, with Prince Caspian and Don Treader, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, were not quite up to snuff, I would definitely not say. Yeah.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, but what we're doing here is sharing a little bit of a tradition that our family had. We watched this movie a lot, and we started watching it on Christmas because it came out on Christmas. It was a Christmas Day movie that we saw back over a decade ago.
Cool. Yeah. So actually, this movie, it's one of the reasons it's so special to me is really because of how we first went and saw it. It was very formative to me. I think that's why I kind of think of it as a Christmas movie, because we went to see it actually for the other Pinedo brother's birthday, and he has that birthday very close to Christmas. And so it was I remember, very vivid memories of, the Advent wreath and lighting the candles, and then lighting our brother's birthday cake as well, and everyone celebrating together. And then afterward, the whole time I was so excited because we were going to get to go see a movie afterwards. And growing up, we never ever went to go see movies. It was very rare that, at least for me, that we'd go to see a movie. And so I was super excited, and then we went, and it was just it was very magical. It has a very magical feel to it. And I think that's one of the points I wanted to bring up with this one. A couple of big kind of takeaways that I have from this film, but one of them definitely is that I think they do a really good job in portraying a magical world. And I think that's important especially for the fantasy, kind of fantasy genre. You want, as an audience member, I think you want to be able to enter into this whole world that you feel exists on its own, and that it just envelops you and sucks you into it. And I think they did a really good job, in my opinion, for Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and kind of portraying and painting that world. And I think if you kind of compare that to other fantasy movies or shows, I'm thinking of Amazon's new Rings of Power show. It's the same kind of genre, about fantasy, but the world to me, and I only watched a couple episodes, was very not magical feeling. It didn't have that same kind of otherworldly feel to it. It felt very much kind of like just somebody's portrayal, someone of this world's portrayal of some kind of other world that just didn't feel real, if that makes sense. But yeah, so memories, it's very tied up with Christmas to me, this idea, this Chronicles of Narnia. And I think that's a good thing, because of course, C.S. Lewis was one of the great Christian authors of late, and his Chronicles of Narnia books, of course, are read by Christian children all over, and they're great stories. I'm pretty sure you've read all of them, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
times.
I of course am a big fan. Do you have a favorite one of the Chronicles
Yes,
of
I
Narnia?
do. I do. The Magician's Nephew. It's by far my favorite. If there's one film of those that I would want to direct, it's that one. Of course, I would love to direct all of them, and I have an intricate plan for directing them all. But if I had to choose, it would be The Magician's Nephew.
Is there a reason? Magician's Nephew?
It has everything. It has everything. I mean, we're talking about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, so I don't want to denigrate that great book. But really, The Magician's Nephew has the great battles. They kind of shoehorned a great battle into this, and there was a battle, but it was kind of anticlimactic in the story, because in the C.S. Lewis book, Aslan comes in and he pretty much just wipes the floor. It's and you don't really see the battle happening. You see Lucy and Susan with Aslan, and not so much the battle going on. So in the book, the battle is not a huge plot point. In the movie, it's huge. Like the battle, they make a huge. It's very well done. It reminds everyone of Lord of the Rings, because I'm sure it was very much inspired by the Two Towers, or the Return of the King. One of the two. They drew a lot of the same shots from those two movies and put into this movie. But The Magician's Nephew has all these great battles already. It's where we first meet the White Witch, who's a great character in this movie. Jardis, who's a fascinating character, and it gives you more of an understanding about why she's so evil, like where she came from and how she came to be in this world. It has magic galore. It's just incredible. It's got a great romance. It's got all these different worlds that you explore, and it's the perfect example of world building. You know how Disney has done it so well? Well, C.S. Lewis did it well beforehand, and Magician's Nephew kind of opens up this, where you see that Narnia is just one piece of this gigantic puzzle. So The Magician's Nephew's got everything that a storyteller would want, galore.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. And I think that's the big thing for me too, that we were talking about, the idea of magic. Like C.S. Lewis stuff definitely left a really good, just a treasure trove, for filmmakers to kind of take from and to be able to build and tell really good stories. My favorite, I think, is the
let me guess, The Horse and the Boy.
The Silver Chair, actually.
The Silver Chair, okay.
Yeah.
Why The Silver Chair?
Well, I just remember that one, I think, stood out to me the most out of all of them, because I just remember that the whole plot twist in it really was like I never saw that coming. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? I don't know if I want to give it away in case there's any listeners who want to go and read Narnia after this. They're very easy read, because they are written for children, so you could read them very quickly without too much trouble. So if you haven't read them, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that.
I need to check it out. When was The Silver Chair written? Do you know?
Oh, I don't.
Let's find this out. The Silver Chair is very similar to the villain in the Silver Chair, the Green Witch. The Green Knight and his witch is very similar to Sauron, 1953. And let's see where The Two Towers was published. 1954. I bet you Tolkien took a little bit from The Silver Chair and brought it into The Two Towers, because the bad guys are very similar in what their power is, because Sauron's power is his voice, and the main villain, her power is her voice. And of course, obviously, I don't think that Tolkien stole anything, but we're influenced, Artists are influenced by everything. So that's interesting.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure that it took years and years for both of them to write to the book. So who's to say who stole from who?
Well, as the foreword of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, as C.S. Lewis writes, he says, "I wrote this for Lucy, my goddaughter, but I found that books grow slower than children. And so now I think you're too old for this. But maybe one day you'll become old enough to like it again. And in that case, I hope you'll take it off the shelf, dust it off, and read it to me. And I'll probably be too old to understand, but I'll still be your affectionate godfather. So I think that's a perfect introduction that he writes. It's a children's story, but yeah, books grow much slower than children do.
Yeah. I remember reading that. That's beautiful. And yeah, I think to me, it was just it was part of that portraying the world where it was just like so mind blowing. And I remember just having very vivid images of the world that Lewis was describing. And that's something that the modern novels don't really have that very much. I'm a big fan of a couple of really good modern novels that have been written, Hunger Games and stuff like that. But they're not even in the same tier as stories by like C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien, because they're the mastery, I think, of the English language is, for one thing, is a big difference. And besides that, just the ability to paint and portray a full world. It's just something that is such, something that we should emulate and really strive for in our art, because it's just really, really nice. But going back to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I remember when we went to see it in theaters, just the way the music, for one thing, is really good, and that really helps.
Music is amazing. Whew.
Right.
So good.
And it's really good, and and as well as the visuals, they do a really good job. And I think that it's very, you enter it, and of course it's at the beginning, Narnia is under the spell of the White Witch, and so it's all winter, very snowy, and then of course the idea of the lamppost. I love that kind of like symbol being there, just like a very mysterious kind of thing, and they do a good job at portraying the mystery of like, what is this random, like I remember Lucy looking at it, and it's just big huge lamppost lit up in the middle of the forest, and it opened, I love the idea. I love it when it be in a movie, a book, a video game, even leave little things in there that they don't ever really bring up again, but you look at them and you're like, what does that mean? It makes you think, and there's some kind of like, there's some kind of extra story to it. Right. And that, of course, that lamppost is explained in your favorite book, Magician's Nephew.
Yeah.
But little Easter eggs like that are things that I appreciate so much. And in my book, the Unfollowed, I do that. I try to do that a lot, like just leaving in little details and little pieces, just to I think it helps with the world building. It helps because if you're in a real world, there's going to be all these different stories and threads that you're never going to pick up because they're not your story, but they're part of the world that you're in. Mm-hmm. And so that's really important, I think, for a good story and for making you feel like you're in part of that world. Yeah. When I think of, that's kind of when I was writing the Unfollowed, something that heavily influenced was the video game, The Last of Us, mm-hmm. the first Last of Us video game, and that one is just full of like little notes and details here and there that were other people's story, but it was part of that world. Mm-hmm. So this movie, first thing, that's something I really loved and appreciated about it. And then the second thing was the heroism of Peter, and I think that, of course, I'm going to be prone to liking the character because he has my name, but they did such a great job, I thought, of portraying him not as a perfect person, but as a truly heroic figure.
Yeah, they arced him so well. He started off, mm-hmm. he was kind of a bully to Edmund, where mm-hmm. he was pushing him around, and, he was using his physical presence to force Edmund to shape up. And he saw very quickly as the movie progressed that that's not adequate. And he did a very Petersonian thing halfway through the movie where he took responsibility for his little brother's actions. He said, it was my fault that my little brother betrayed us all. It's my fault. And so in doing that, he becomes this hero in taking on this responsibility. Obviously, mm-hmm. Peterson didn't come up with that notion of responsibility, because C.S. Lewis wrote this way before. So yeah, Peter, the character of Peter, they do such a good job in the movie of giving him a great hero's journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another thing. I think I don't know if you listen to the. I know that you do listen to them pretty often. The Daily Wire Backstage podcast. When they all get together and talk, they were talking about movies in the last one, I think, and how this idea of competent white males not really being around anymore, and that's not something that's portrayed very often. And so I think that is a missing element of storytelling, having a strong male figure. I think that's important to any story. You know, you can't, a story without a strong male figure is, you know, it's half a story, right? And so I think that Narnia, of course, this was coming before, I think, culture started to get super crazy. Of course, it was still crazy back then. What's that?
2005, yeah.
2005, yeah. But this is coming out of Disney, you know, of all places.
Yeah.
Which,
Isn't it nice to remember a time when Disney, you didn't just expect them to have some sort of propaganda that they're shoving down your throat when you sit down in a chair to watch a Disney movie. I sat down and I watched this movie this past weekend, and I was just like, you know, it's so nice to remember that Disney wasn't always terrible. Yeah. As recent as 2005, they were decent.
Yeah, you know, living memory for us, but not for our children, unfortunately.
So sad.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last kids movie that Disney did was about it was about a child who was, you know, going to save his boyfriend or something like that.
Yeah, Strange
island.
World.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think that one lost money, right?
Yes. No, they lost their shirts on that. They probably lost hundreds of millions of dollars when it's all said and done.
So maybe a brighter Disney is around the corner. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's a good question. People need to ask themselves, what do you prefer, your principle or profit? I mean, there's been a great many of faith-based films that have preferred their principles to profits. So it's not a foregone conclusion that Disney is going to say, oh, you know what, we're going to shape up. But what do you prefer? Do you prefer to lose money or not? The choice is yours, Disney. Yeah.
And I know that they just got rid of their CEO and then replaced him with someone who was already there. So I don't know. Who knows if we'll end up seeing a little bit better stuff coming out of, things that would be making Walt Disney roll in his grave, or if they'll switch paths and start actually doing some quality content for kids and for families. But, you know,
we wait with bated breath.
Yeah. But yeah. So I don't know when it started going crazy. That would be an interesting question to kind of think about, because 2005, you know, Narnia, Chronicles of Narnia, the Lion and Witch in the Wardrobe, it's a really good one. People should go check it out. But the third takeaway that I had from it was also the portrayal of Aslan. I really liked, and especially if you're kind of like looking back at the BBC's portrayal of Aslan. To me, at least in the first one, from what I remember, Aslan was kind of creepy to me. At least
there were a lot of creepier moments in the BBC one, but creepy is not necessarily bad.
Yeah, I mean, as they say, he's not a tame lion, you know. But
I mean, puppets are creepy. That was a limitation of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much everyone looks at a puppet and they're like, a little scary. Although puppet Yoda was better than CGI Yoda, so that's not universal that CG is better than puppets. But we can do a lot more with our CG these days, and the CG in this film really holds up.
Yeah, which is pretty good considering it was
2005.
That's almost 20 years ago. So that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, you can't say the same for a lot of films that are that old.
Yeah, definitely. Which is so sad, because if you really love a movie and then you go back to it and you're like, oh man, I can't do this. Yeah. I think in some ways, like the old Star Wars are kind of a little bit difficult, especially for people who are not as in love with them from their childhood. If they watch it now, they're just kind of like, I can't really watch this because
Mhm.
it's just not a quality. Things move on, and so it's unfortunate, I think. Anyway, as I was saying, this is kind of where it kind of ties in, I think, a little bit more to this Christmas time and this Christmas season. Of course, Aslan in the Chronicles of Narnia is Christ, is the portrayal of Christ who became man, and this really tells it's very much a Christmas story because of course, as Christians, we know and believe that Christ became one of us, became man, in order to uh, suffer and die on the cross. And that's what the Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe portrays. And I think that the movie did quite a good job at it. And especially considering it's Disney's completely secular studio, nothing to do with Christianity or any church. But this is the story of Christ's sacrifice, and that's what the Christmas story is. That's why Christ came down and became incarnate in order to live as one of us, and then to eventually sacrifice himself. And that's what Aslan does in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it's just great. It's just really great to see. I think they do, because of course Christmas and Easter are two intrinsically tied holidays. You can't have you don't have one without the other.
Right.
Christmas is for Easter, and Easter is possible because of Christmas.
Well, as Bishop Fulton J. Sheen, a great, who had the number one TV show in the 1950s on primetime, said that the cross overshadows the cradle at Bethlehem. The two are intrinsically linked, like you said. So this is a Christmas movie because it is a movie about the cross, and it's a movie about the world in darkness waiting for the Savior. So it's not a stretch at all. I think this is a perfect Christmas movie.
Mm-hmm. And it tells the story with the context of understanding who Aslan is, and it tells the story in quite a exciting and fun way, and it's a great way to share with your kids, that the resurrection story, and that they can see the magic of the moments, because in reality, Christ becoming incarnate and his sacrifice saving all of us, and his blood cleansing all is something that's very magical in real life. And Narnia, of course, makes that magic quite felt and seen by the audience. I think that it was really recently with the podcast that we were talking actually about the last battle for C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, Last Battle, and his portrayal of heaven, making it so much more real. And I think a much more accurate portrayal of what heaven will be like than I think what most people have in their mind, of there being like clouds and harps and, cartoon angels running around. So this is just, I think, the perfect time, like you were saying, to be watching the Chronicles of Narnia and thinking and reflecting on the beauty of the incarnation and the beauty of the birth of Christ, and what it means for him and what it means for us. Christ becoming one of us, and then sacrificing himself, what the birth of Christ means for him later on, and what it means for us being able to make it to heaven, for one thing, and being able to say that God is truly one of us. This film, be it very fantasy realm and talking lions and talking animals, it tells very deep truths. And kind of like how Aslan says, if the witch had known about the deep magic that was deeper than what she had known, and I think you can kind of say, like, so people might look at it and say it's just a kid's story, or fantasy, but it tells a deep magic. It tells a deep truth that's really important to us, and really and crucial for us to really reflect on during this Christmas time, because we have in society a very kind of dumbed down version of Christmas. People think it's like, this is such a busy time and it's so crazy with the traffic and the, buying gifts and seeing family members that maybe you may or not may want to see. And for many, with that view of Christmas, it becomes such a burden and something that instead of recharging or helping you, it is something that you dread and have to get through. And even if you do enjoy Christmas, even if you do like seeing your family, if it's just about seeing your family and relaxing, then it's still not the deep magic. It's not the truth about Christmas. And so I think Narnia and the story can really help us reflect on the deep truth of Christmas. And if we can take that time and really reflect on this incredible beauty of Christ becoming one of us and Christ becoming a vulnerable child, then I think that Narnia is a great Christmas movie for us all to enjoy.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful Christmas movie for us all to enjoy. I have 2 points that come from what you're saying. You've been saying. So the deeper magic, the witch knew of the deep magic, but not of the deeper magic, Aslan likes to say. And the witch is portrayed, I think she's a little heavy-handedly portrayed by Tilda Swinton in this film. Not saying that Tilda's a great actress, so I don't want to critique someone who's really good, but I don't think there's an understanding of C.S. Lewis's character. You need to really, if you're going to be an actor, do your homework and study who this character is. And you can find that quite clearly if you read The Magician's Nephew, where we first meet the White Witch, her name is Jardis. Jardis is the postmodernist. C.S. Lewis is writing in the 1950s, and he's seeing this postmodernist heresy that's coming through, where there's this crisis of meaning. Jardis's world is one that is completely, the sun has been drained. Like literally what's happening in Jardis's world is that it's too tired to move forward, and everyone has killed each other out. So her world is dying. And this is exactly what C.S. Lewis is saying that postmodernism leads us, where our world becomes devoid of all meaning, and the sun itself, light itself, is gone. The logos has disappeared, and all that's left is death. And so Jardis is ruling over an empty planet, which is exactly which I can sometimes surmise that some of these postmodernists these days, where it seems like there's just a desire to tear down everything. It's exactly what postmodernists seem to want. And so what we see in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, so what happens is Jardis enters Narnia, and eventually she manages, Aslan lets her enter. So when Narnia is created, Aslan sees this White Witch, and the White Witch sees Aslan, and the White Witch throws a lamppost at Aslan, and it doesn't hurt him at all, and then she runs off. And Aslan lets her run off. So the serpent gets into the garden. So this is a creation story of Narnia. And just like in our creation story, God allows the serpent into the garden. And eventually the serpent, Jardis, takes over Narnia. And that's where we enter the story in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. C.S. Lewis dropped us in media res, in the middle of things. And so exactly what you're describing, which is there's an emptiness, a devoidness of meaning, is what has conquered the land. And what the 4 children are tasked to do is work with Aslan to bring back meaning into the world, which is outside of oneself. They have to defeat the postmodernist icon, the postmodernist hero, and take on the mantle of kings. A line that I love in that's towards the end of the movie is they say, once a king of Narnia, always a king of Narnia. It's exactly what God says to us, is that I crown you priest, prophet, and king, and you will never lose your status as a priest, prophet, and king. So it's a very mystical story and a very magical story. C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, and G.K. Chesterton, for me, are the three horsemen of magic, of this Christian magic, where it seems like we're a little bit scared of it, but as storytellers, at least, I don't want to speak for everyone. Maybe the non-artistic families will find it dangerous. But as storytellers, magic is how we understand grace, is how we understand the supernatural, this supernatural joy, this eucatastrophe that Tolkien likes to talk about, of Christ coming into the world. And so we understand this magic through Aslan and through all these dwarves and goblins and witches and all of these figments of a deeper reality explain for us how we can understand this great world that we live in. So in understanding and experiencing Narnia, we understand our own worlds that much better. So I want to say, though, that makes it very difficult for a storyteller to ground, because it's so fantastic. It's written so fantastic. It's very difficult for a storyteller to take this fantastic work of art, which is, larger than life. And it's hard to suspend disbelief if you just put that into a story. If you just put that under the screen, it's almost like it doesn't feel, it feels too fantastic to believe. And what they do so well in this movie, which I really want to commend the filmmakers for, is they ground it from the very beginning in history. You see the great bomber planes moving in onto London. And that's not something that C.S. Lewis had written into his book at all. It starts off, C.S. Lewis says, and the children are being sent away from the bombings. Well, in the movie, that one little line gets blown up into an entire exciting scene. Mm-hmm. And that's so smart, because the filmmakers are thinking, okay, how can we help our audience suspend disbelief and become enmeshed into this magic of the world? It's a very difficult thing to do. It's one that I think most filmmakers fail at when they come to writing about these fantastic worlds. This one, they nail it. They really, I was sitting in there skeptical. I was expecting not to like the movie when we first sat in that movie theater. And I walked out of there saying, that was great. They managed to get me in, I'm just speaking of myself, to suspend that disbelief and enter into the magic. And then once you do that, you can do all sorts of wonderful things. So, and it was not just me. This movie did really well. So I wasn't the only one that suspended disbelief. So those are the 2 points. So one is like, it's very difficult to speak about that magic, but that magic helps inform ourselves of a larger reality. It helps break this crisis of meaning, break through it, and inform us of our true heritage if we enter into this story, this fantastic story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with the three horsemen of magic in this Christian understanding, this very deeply Catholic understanding that Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and Chesterton, just they're, for one thing, technically great, with their mastery of the English language and their literature, and then just imbuing every work with their deep, I think, appreciation of the beauty of the Catholic faith and of the Christian faith. Just something that's very much needed in this time. And I think that hats off. Do you know who directed this movie? I don't quite recall that right now, but I know that whoever they are, they really
Andrew Adamson,
yeah.
New Zealand film director. Shrek 2, The Chronicles of Narnia. He also did Prince Caspian, so he's not perfect. Mm-hmm. But he nailed it for this one.
I mean, it's very possible that, but maybe he is a really good director, and when Disney realized they had something really good that people liked, they didn't let him do anything in Prince Caspian. That's really possible too.
You're right.
Because I know that happens a lot with the big studios, especially Disney. They'll just kind of take the reins and not let the creatives have any creative power in the film.
Yeah, the producers have an incredible sway over the story. That's true. So the producers need to be on board. But I don't know any of the makers of this movie, so I can't speak firsthand and say what happened. I can just
Yeah.
watch the product and say they kind of lost their way on part 2. Sadly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, I think, again, go check it out if you have not seen. This is a great Christmas movie. We wanted to discuss one that was, of course, important. And it is an important time to be remembering the truth about, for one thing, well, obviously Christmas, but also for another thing, Christianity, these forgotten values and this forgotten deep magic. We can't completely lose sight of it. And it's, I think, our calling and our job as Christians to continue to not forget it and to continue calling attention to these truths. So go check it out. It's gonna be good.
That's great. Okay, well, shall we get to the mailbag?
Yeah, let's hear from the good people.
Great. Okay, so we have a comment from our Advent season with the Chosen People episode. That was episode 36 of this, our season 3. I have this is from Nathaniel and Jamie Donahue. This is a great comment. It's a little long. We'll see how far we get through it. I have a slight conflict of thought regarding 2 particular topics addressed between this episode and 2 episodes ago. So 2 episodes ago would have been our Advent kickoff. Well, it was the woke Christmas, or the woke Thanksgiving episode. So this conflict is regarding Advent and how we as Orthodox Catholics ought to celebrate or memorialize this wonderfully anticipatory and cleansing, yet also joyous and celebratory season, leading to a most wondrous and humbling moment of God himself being born of lowly man. One you mentioned rather enthusiastically. I cannot recall which of you it was or exactly what you said, so please excuse any mischaracterizations from here on. A couple of particular behaviors ceding ground in the general secular society, such as using the phrase happy holidays, though technically true due to there being multiple holy days, Our Lady 3 times, St. Nicholas, Christmas time. Also, in my estimation, a colloquial acknowledgement of all the non-Catholic holidays, celebrations occurring in proximation to ours, feasts. No ill will meant towards our brothers and sisters celebrating non-Catholic holidays, though certainly a humble assertion of truth of our faith without exception as the path of heaven, as the is bolded, the path to heaven. And secondly, partaking in Christmas celebrations parties before Christmas. I intentionally leave the second one brief because there are so many different ways to respond on both sides of the discussion. For example, logistics. Most people have some kind of break from work, school between mid-December or early January, and it's easier for some reason in our current time to host a party on 12/19 than 1/4. However, it is clear in my view that one ought to host a Christmas party during Christmastide, which is 12/25 through 1/6. What do we do about our Christmas celebrating Advent non-celebrating friends and colleagues out there who invite us to a party before Christmas when we walk in the door wish us a happy holidays, though clearly the attempt is to partake in a slightly misdirected celebration of Christmas. There's also a course of leading by example. For every pre-Christmas party attended, one perhaps might host a true Christmas party of equal or greater magnanimity. At any rate, as this comment lengthened more and more, I do greatly appreciate you all calling attention to this too, and really living out this season of Advent by discussing topics like this episode. And I would certainly say you all are contributing positively to the sentiment of focusing on Advent during Advent and Christmas during Christmas. As a secondary purpose of this podcast, as I trust the more primary purpose is to simply live the moment which we find ourselves in to the best of our abilities as Catholics. Whew, a lot there. Your take.
Yeah, so I think that for me, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One of the things that I've always felt kind of a great calling towards is being a person who lives very much in your time, you know? So I think I really appreciate the comment. I think that's really insightful and a lot of wisdom there. I think oftentimes as Catholics and even as Christians in general, we have a tendency to either completely accept the world and just basically have this lukewarm Christian faith, or we go to the complete opposite kind of extreme where we reject our time completely and just kind of want to live as in we're living in a different world or a different time. So I think when you kind of talk about celebrating Christmas before Christmas and during Advent and all of those things, I think it's important to very much kind of how we've said in the past, continue calling attention to the truth, the deep magic of Christmas, and how Advent is a time meant to prepare and to reflect, and how we can't lose sight of that. But at the same time, if we're boycotting a Christmas party, what really at the end result, whether we mean it or not, is we're boycotting Christmas. And so you have a work friend or a friend, a colleague who's inviting you to a Christmas party, and you refuse to go for just the reason that it's not Christmas yet. Ultimately, the unintended consequences that you're boycotting Christmas. And so it's kind of this idea of having to accept the world and not accept it, and you want to continue changing the world and continue kind of fighting for your faith. But if you're rejecting just any vestige of the reality in the world that we live in, it ends up having, I think, it's an abandonment of the world, which if all Christians abandon the world, then obviously there's going to be no Christianity left.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you're right. And I think Nathan speaks to that, and Nathaniel speaks to that, and that he is saying that we as Catholics need to live in our time as well. I think you guys are not disagreeing there. Is there a particular point that you do disagree with Nathaniel?
Well, what do you think can you tell me what you're thinking he's kind of saying there then?
Well, I think I agree with everything that he said, with one exception, and that's I don't see as I don't believe my characterization of the term happy holidays as seeding ground. I see it as I'm taking that phrase and I'm using it to my own ends because it is helpful to my own ends. Just like the church took the winter solstice and turned this pagan holiday into Christmas. They used it for a holy end. Just in that same way, I'm not saying that I have the wisdom of the church. I'm just one person. But I think what we can do here is take this phrase, this colloquialism, happy holidays, and enshrine it with a deeper meaning, with a realization that these are holy days, because that is what the word means. I don't think that necessarily saying happy holidays means that I'm celebrating Kwanzaa. I mean, very few people are celebrating Kwanzaa, so that would be a rather weird thing to be saying. To be celebrating with that phrase, really, I mean, I'm I'm not joking. There is that the percentage of people that celebrate Kwanzaa is practically non-existent. So if someone wants to go out there and wish me a happy Kwanzaa by saying happy holidays, more power to you. But I don't think me saying the word back to him is me celebrating Kwanzaa. So that would be one thing, is that I don't think taking that word and using that word is celebrating silly things that are made up out of half-hearted and misdirected attempts to be kind to other faiths. I don't see that one of them equates to the other, which I think is what he's saying, is that if you accept the term happy holidays, and you don't do like what our dad used to do, who would bristle at the term happy holidays and mutter back Merry Christmas, which I think there's more power to our dad for doing that. One of our most faithful listeners, and I always used to enjoy him saying back Merry Christmas very emphatically, because it's like, no, you know what? I'm different than you are. I actually recognize what is the reason for this season. I think instead of saying back Merry Christmas very confrontationally, we can say Happy Holidays back or Merry Christmas back, but very joyously, because we're realizing someone is wishing a blessing upon us, even if it's someone who's misguided enough to think that they're celebrating Kwanzaa by saying it, and then turn that phrase into a deeper meaning. Just like Chesterton used to say, there was some argument going on about there was a place called Holywell or Hollywell nearby, and there was some historians who were trying to say, well, it's not people mistakenly think that it's because this was a holy site, a site of baptisms, that they call it was a holy well, and then they became Hollywell. Actually, the well had leaks in it, and so it was holy well. It was a well full of holes. And so that's why it became known as Hollywell. And Chesterton is like, well, okay, You can take that definition. It's a leaky one at best, but it doesn't mean you're right. In fact, you're quite wrong. The deeper meaning of this phrase is actually one that is true. And so I'm going to say Hollowell knowing that it was a holy well. I'm going to say Hollywood knowing that it used to be it was named as such for the holy wood of the cross. It has a deeper, the essence of it is a good thing. So I'm saying in a long roundabout way, I don't see happy holidays as an intrinsically giving ground to the culture. I think we take it and turn it against that culture that might want to use it against us and say, ha, we gotcha. These are holy days. What do you make?
I think so. I mean, I agree. I don't think that we have to accept what. I mean, you can't. Also, when someone says, "Yeah," you like you were saying, they're wishing something good on you, and you can't really say exactly what they're thinking. Other than that, we know that as a culture, Christmas is the holiday, so you're not denying the existence of other holidays around this time, but we know that the reason that everyone is celebrating is because of Christmas. And so I think sometimes we can tend to be insecure about, as Christians, we can tend to be insecure about culture, like moving away from Christmas and it's all holidays now. But I don't think that's happening. And I think that really, like we were saying, we continue to speak the truth about Christmas, but I don't see a problem in the holiday, like you were saying with the holidays. It's something that we can take and Christianize.
Right. Well, and don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm going to be sending out happy holiday cards. I very much enjoy sending out Merry Christmas cards. Quite the opposite of happy holidays. I just think there should be a mental shift for us where instead of getting angry all the time at people wishing us happy holidays, we can start finding a way to turn that term into something that is sanctified. That's the only point that I would make there. And then the other point that Nathaniel made, and I really do appreciate this thoughtful comment, this is really good, is about the Christmas parties and things like that, where Christmas parties before Christmas. He spoke very vividly to, what do? You walk in, someone's wishing you enthusiastically happy holidays, and it's like December 19th or December 15th, and it's for Christmas. And then are you like, tell me, what's your response to that, Peter? Like, what do you do in that sort of situation?
If somebody walk in and someone says happy holidays,
and it's a party on December 15th, and let's suppose you haven't even gone yet. That's going to be the first thing that happens if you were to go.
You just say Merry Christmas. Wait, what's the?
You don't see the conundrum. Well, I think that if I don't know if Nathaniel's exactly in this boat, but I think that there's many good Catholics who they feel like a need to, if there's a Christmas party that happens, on December 19th, maybe I shouldn't go to it because it's not Christmas. Or if I do go to it, we have to make sure we have something greater on the, actually during Christmas time, an equal or greater party on Christmas time, and invite them over, like there needs to be some sort of balance here so that we're not seeding all of our Christmas season and pushing what little we have into Advent. I think another example of this sort of sentiment is not wanting to listen to Christmas music before Christmas season starts, so before Christmas Day. Does that make sense? And I might be mischaracterizing his sentiment, but I think that's how I'm understanding it. Does it make that is how I understand it, and I think that's what he means. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and to me, it just kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that I don't think that we're called to not acknowledge someone's genuine efforts to celebrate Christmas. If they're throwing a Christmas party and they're saying happy holidays to you, it's just, that it is for Christmas. And you can, I don't think that you're, by, refusing to acknowledge it or to participate in it, is helpful to teaching them the truth about Christmas.
Okay.
or
What
teaching
about,
them the truth about Advent, for that matter, you know?
okay. What about Christmas music? Like listening to Christmas music before Christmas Day?
Well, I mean, for me, it's more of a question of it's more the practical question. I can only listen to Christmas music for too long before I get upset with listening to it. So I don't really listen to Christmas music until about this week, at which point, you know, we're really preparing our hearts very much for Christmas. And I I I think I might not be the right person to talk to, because I only listen to very like specific kinds of Christmas music, and a lot of it is more Christian themed. So I'm just not a big fan of commercialized Christmas music in general. So that's, I mean, whatever they play, the 5 Christmas songs that they play on loop on the radio station is what everyone thinks of when it comes to Christmas.
Simply having a wonderful Christmas time.
Yeah, and that's just not what I'm listening to. So I might not be the right person to answer that question.
Okay. Well, I'm just drawing those 2 examples. So Christmas party and Christmas music. I think that's something that us as Catholics, we experience all the time, or we're invited to Christmas parties outside of Christmas season, or we have the desire to listen to Christmas music, or be around people who want to listen to Christmas music when it's not Christmas yet. I don't think most people are as pure as you, Peter, that were like, oh, well, I'm not a big fan of that, so I'm just not going to listen to it. I think I'm a big fan of even the simply having a wonderful Christmas time. I can't listen to it very many times, but I'll listen to it a couple of times and be like, okay, sure, that's fun. And then it's time to tune it out. So I do think that there is a over commercialization. Like everyone says that, you know, and everyone hears it and sees it and realizes that Christmas has become a way for people to make money. And that's not a bad thing. I believe in capitalism. I believe in making money. I would like more of it. So that putting that out there. However, it's kind of your interior state, you know. How are you prepping your heart every day? You know, which way are you going? I don't think that it's necessarily helpful to be stressed out about, or how much Christmas music are you listening to, or how many Christmas parties are you going to. I think it's actually a little bit better to be focused on what your interior life is doing, and let the rest of it kind of just let it happen. I don't see that there's a need to be particularly stressed one way or another about it. Are you following Christ? Are you working hard through this liturgical season on prepping for the us remembering Christ's birth here on earth? Those are more interesting questions to me, not whether or not we should be going to Christmas parties or Christmas music. I think it seems like might be an invitation to just be stressed out, when I don't see that it's necessarily a helpful thing. I do think that I'm not infallible, though. And if for a particular family that there is a desire to refrain from those sort of things, or to, you know, balance it out, that's great. That's fine. I don't necessarily think that it's something that every family needs to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you say it's depending on your interior state, you know. So different families and different individuals might have different ways of living out their interior life and their interior relationship with Christ, and that's of course what Christmas is about. So if you're focusing on that, you might have different ways of responding to what you're hearing in your heart. And so I think that it's totally valid for one Catholic to not be wanting to go to a Christmas party during the Advent season, and then totally valid for one to want to do it. You know, it just depends on what their interior state and what it means to them. So I think there's a lot of room for differences of opinion and ways of living that out.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Absolutely. And speaking of ways of living that out, I think we'd be remiss not to bring up someone who lived out his faith very publicly, who's now been defrocked, Father Frank Pavone. Peter, as a DC correspondent, I think you have an interesting take on that. Do you have any insight for our audience on this very troubling thing? And maybe tell us about what happened. Give us the facts of it, because maybe not everyone has heard about it.
Yeah, well, so if you're not familiar with what JP is referring to, it's Father Frank Pavone of the organization Priests for Life. He's a outspoken pro-life activist and a very politically oriented. He's a very big and outspoken supporter of Donald Trump, and he was just over this weekend defrocked by the Vatican, which to be defrocked means to be laicized and to be taken out or to be removed from the priesthood. And this is something that is only supposed to be done in very extreme cases of when the priest has completely profaned his priesthood, and where continuing to allow him to practice his priesthood is causing a scandal to the church. So, like a sexual abuse scandal, that is a perfect example of, a priest being properly defrocked if the church were to say, continuing to allow you to practice your priesthood, your priestly vows, is you've denied and you've rejected your priestly vows by conducting yourself in this way. And so we're now defrocking you and not allowing you to continue practicing your priestly ministry. This happened to Father Frank Pavone. There's never been any allegations, as far as I am aware, of any kind of sexual abuse or any abuse really other than his very overt and very outspoken political feelings and thoughts. So there's a couple of things that kind of go into it, in that the church is not supposed to take a overt political stance in as far as when it comes to like endorsing a candidate. The church very obviously takes political stances in that it says, abortion is evil and you cannot support abortion in any way. That being said, of course, there's tons of Catholic politicians, the president being one of them, and many prominent senators and representatives who call themselves Catholic and support blatantly anti-Catholic positions. But that being said, the Catholic Church is not supposed to take, to straight up just endorse one candidate over the other. It's more kind of coming from a policy position. We're against abortion, we're for traditional marriage, things like that. So there's kind of different ways of seeing this incident in which Father Frank Pavone has been removed from the priesthood over his political views. I think that you could make an argument either way. You could make an argument saying that this is fine because he was disobedient, and as priest you take a vow of obedience. So he was kind of unruly and disobedient to his bishops. Whether or not he's right or wrong is less important than also following your priestly vow of obedience. So you could make an argument that it was justified. However, I think it's important that the church be applying its justice properly to both ends. And you do see the church really, you would question, like, why is the church targeting Father Frank Pavone when there's lots of, people who are sexual abuse scandals and things like that who have gone unpunished. And so it is a kind of troubling, like you were saying, troubling incident to see what happened. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm grateful that as Catholics, we don't have faith in the Pope. We have faith in the church, upon this rock that Christ has built his church. But the individual of the Pope, we don't have any faith in him at all. And we shouldn't have any faith in him because he often can be rotten to the core. And I'm not saying that this Pope is, but we've had some pretty rotten popes. And this is a very troubling move. It's deeply troubling because there are no examples of anything like this ever happening, where there's someone who's spoken out for the truth and been laicized for it, at least in recent memory. There's been some saints that's happened. There's been rotten popes before who have attacked saints and laicized them or taken away their faculties. and then they've been later reinstated. But this is something that's really out of the blue. It doesn't happen. I've gone to mass where there's priests that were sex offenders up there on the altar, and they're still out there practicing. Or there's people that are protected sex offenders, and they're still out there practicing. There's many Jesuits that openly flaunt church teaching over the protestations of their bishop, and they're out there practicing. They're creating grave scandal. And this man, he is overly political for a priest, but he's not saying anything that isn't true. So it's ridiculous. And I like the way LifeSite News says it. It's beyond belief that a church hierarchy laicizes him for saying what is true. That speaking very boldly, that abortion is evil and a sin. So it's not to be tolerated, really. So the fact that this man is no longer a priest, well, he's always a priest, but he no longer can act like a priest. He can no longer practice his priesthood. It is a deeply troubling thing. And I think the greatest sadness about this will drive people from the church. I mean, you think about those converts who've come from Anglicanism or the Orthodox Church. There's really very little reason to stick around for those type of converts, because they came expecting the one true church to hold true to its standards. And this is exactly the opposite of holding true to standards. This is kowtowing to a certain political persuasion and attacking one side politically because you don't like that the politics of that side. So there's an utter disregard for truth at all. And so because of that scandal that the church hierarchy led by Francis has done, there's going to be grave repercussions for these members of the church hierarchy in the afterlife. And I shudder to think about what they're going to be facing, especially Pope Francis as the leader of the church. I do hope that he faces it soon rather than later, because I don't think that this is good at all. What is your take on all that?
I think you and I probably have a little bit of a different view when it comes to this. I don't think that I would use as strong language or take quite as strong of a position on this as you. I am aware, for one thing, I am aware that there are priests are normally defrocked and laicized for sexual abuse, and I've covered a good number of sexual abuse cases of priests who have been laicized, and so that's something I'm somewhat familiar with. And so, but I know that there are high profile cases, of course, that we've known where bishops and even cardinals have been protected by the church hierarchy in these cases, where they're known to be sex offenders and they're still protected. So that causes an incredible scandal. So I think that's where you and I agree very much that what it comes down to is the whole purpose, the point of laicization is that them continuing to show themselves as priests is causing a scandal to the faithful. And when you have the case of Father Frank Pavone, I think that there are the reasons are unclear exactly for what he has done. So I would be hesitant to take an extremely strong stance on it until we know everything and know more, because it's still very unclear. For the time being, it causes a great amount of scandal. But that being said, I don't think that priests should be making overt endorsements of candidates or of politicians. And I think that Father Frank Pavone, being a great defender of the unborn, I think that he probably has saved, thousands and thousands of lives. And we as a church should not be punishing people for saving lives. But that being said, I think that he has been very disobedient to bishops and church hierarchy. That does go against his vow. So I think from a technical standpoint, you could say that it's not technically wrong for him to be laicized, if that makes sense.
Okay, I want to push back on the first thing. It does make sense. I want to push back on the first thing. So my point was that this doesn't happen for the reasons that you just described. Can you say that this has happened before for disobedience, for example, where someone has taken an overly political stance and they've said, and this is all we can judge is that all we can know is that he has been laicized because he took an overly political stance. The bishop said, don't do that, and he did it anyway. So can you tell me of a time that this might have happened? Because I'd never heard of that happening where someone becomes laicized for exactly that reason. And that was my point, was that that doesn't happen. Or maybe you weren't quibbling with that.
No, not really. I mean, I think that it's a surprising move, and it's hard to understand exactly what's happening and why it's going on. And I think that's more why I'm hesitant, because I feel like I only have half the story. And I'm very doubtful that Father Frank Pavone really did anything meriting being laicized, especially, given the church that we are in today. But so I think that from what I can tell, it's something that is deeply troubling, like you were saying, and it has the potential to cause a lot of scandal to Christians. And of course, the response to that would also be that if you're Catholic because of Father Frank Pavone, then you're not Catholic for the right reasons. But understanding that,
people aren't going to be Catholic because of Father Frank Pavone, but they are going to be Catholic for the same stands that Father Frank Pavone spoke so forcefully for.
Mm-hmm. And into that, it is kind of weird. It's almost like a bit of a cognitive dissonance, because the church has not in any way, shape, or form changed its position on abortion, and it still takes just as solid a stance as ever. At the same time, you have someone like Pavone and of Priest for Life being removed from the priesthood. So it's almost like kind of hearing two different messages. And I think as Catholics, we can continue to look at the primary message that's coming from the church, and that's not pro-abortion. That's not for these things, even if there's political games kind of being played within the church, which unfortunately has always kind of been the reality.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I 100% agree with that point, is that we've had a wonderful time under JP2 and Pope Benedict where it was, the church orthodoxy was front and center. The timeless teachings and traditions of the church were upheld. This current pontate is more interested in the appearances of certain political persuasions over others than timeless traditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a step farther than I think we've seen. So hopefully it's not, like you're saying, it is troubling, because hopefully it's not a sign of worse things to come. Because from what I've seen of Pope Francis, he is definitely on the left, but he also is, from what I can tell, someone who deeply loves people, deeply loves the world, and deeply loves people, and deeply, I think that he does deeply love the Catholic faith. That's not to say that he is is able to lead and follow it the same way that Benedict or JP2 could or did. But I don't see him as kind of a malicious figure. And I don't think that, personally, I think it's very doubtful that all of this is coming from him. It just, because someone might say only a pope could defrock a person in this way, that doesn't mean that the decision was made by him. And it could be still a fault of him having oversight. But, that doesn't mean that he's the one that made the decision and that it's being made out of some kind of malicious thing from Pope Francis. So like you're saying, I agree. I think it's very troubling, but I just don't think I would take quite as strong of a stance as you on it.
Yeah, you wouldn't attribute it directly to Pope Francis like I did. Yeah, fair enough. We can't know that. I would say, as just a rebuttal to that, it's his job. It's his responsibility to make sure things like this don't happen. And they did. So ultimately it goes to him. Or if they do happen, then you need to take out all of the left-leaning figures who are far more disobedient and who actually go against church teaching and create incredible scandal on a daily basis. And there's a lot of them. So one or the other has to happen. You can't, something like this can't happen because there's too many souls at stake.
Yeah, when it comes to the applying justice, I think it's important to do it equally. So if you're going to be laicizing a priest for disobedience on the right, it should be done on the left as well. And unfortunately, you don't really see that.
Yeah. And another big thing that I would say is a respect for truth is needed. And I think as a laity, we need to be this is a call for us as laity to be more informed, to be informed about our church, about our faith, to know what our faith says. If we're not informed on what the Catholic Church teaching is, then we can fall for any sort of interpretation at any moment in time. And then also informed in our church. We can't trust the hierarchy to do what's right anymore. So we need to be a big part of our church because there's not enough priests anymore. The laity can have a much bigger sway in their local parish. So this is a great clarion call that we need to become involved with our local parishes and also challenge ourselves to know more about what our faith preaches, because we can't trust the people from the top to give it to us clearly.
And it's oftentimes, I always think of Saint Francis of Assisi. He was not even a priest. He was the highest rank in the church hierarchy that he ever achieved was a deacon. And that was only because they say, are you the leader of this order? You need to be something. And him being a very humble member of the church as the person who recognized by the Pope as the person who held up the church when it was crumbling around him. So it's not and though deeply troubling, I don't think it's a need for despair. And as Catholics, we are used to living with things crumbling around us, and we're called to continue to be the pillar to hold it up. So it's a call instead of despair to prayer and to trust in God.
Yeah. I am comforted by the fact that there have been many attacks from without upon the church, but there haven't been nearly as many attacks from without as there have been attacks from within. And none of them have been successful. So no reason to think that any future attacks from within might be successful. So we must just be stout-hearted and hold on.
I think our dad always would say that story. I think it was Napoleon, where Napoleon had announced someone in the Vatican that he was going to destroy the church, and the bishop replied, "Well, good luck. We've been trying to destroy it for 1,700 years." So,
don't think luck. We can be any better at it than we are. That's it. Okay. Well, I hope that this little Christmas episode has not been brought down too much here by the end, because I think this is a great time to take heart. Our Savior has come. And just like the cradle is overshadowed by the cross, so too are these travails also overshadowed by the cross. And the cross is no longer a sign of tragedy, but one of victory.
Absolutely.
Any other closing thoughts for us, Peter?
Well, we are very grateful that you've joined us today on our Christmas special, our Christmas episode. But I just wanted to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, and thank you very much for joining us. We hope that you have a wonderful Christmas season, and that it's a very blessed and holy season.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, an artist podcast for Catholics. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing, and commenting below. That really helps. This episode was edited and recorded by me, JP. Makeup was done by no one, if you couldn't tell. The Pinedo Brothers are Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. For more information on us, check us out at pinedobrothers.com. Thanks again.